In early 2022, I developed the Super Safety. This is a small cam and lever that go into a standard AR-15 fire control group, and with some small modifications to the trigger, it is an active reset trigger. It's selectable between active and passive modes, and so it's 3-position, has safe, active, and passive, and it works fantastic. There has been a lot of patent issues or accusations surrounding the Super Safety in the last few months. I'm going to address those in this video. So we're going to start off with a patent which caused a lot of confusion, and this is kind of the original FRT patent, if you will, and it is patent number 10.514.223, just the 223 patent as far as this video is concerned, and it describes the original FR-15. And I actually designed a clone of this way back when, which is kind of what sparked my interest in this style of trigger, and that one did infringe on this patent, allegedly, and we worked that out with the patent holders at that time. This patent does not apply to the Super Safety at all, and I just want to quickly show you guys that it's completely irrelevant. Right here, we have some plain language. The trigger has a surface positioned to be contacted by the hammer when the hammer is displaced by selecting the bolt carrier. And then it's claiming a locking bar, which is a pivotally mounted like sear block, which locks the hammer in the reset position until the bolt moves all the way forward again. This is the original FR-15 patent, and that's what it applies to. It is not relevant to the Super Safety or anything surrounding the Super Safety. I just want to get that out of the way to remove some confusion. Now, there is a patent from 2003, which is now expired. It's what I call the original Blakely patent. It's 723. It's the 723 patent, and it was filed in 2003, and it's now expired. It's now prior art, and it actually describes something really similar to the Super Safety, which is interesting. If I go to an illustration, it describes a cam of sorts mounted like on a lever as one piece. And when the bolt carrier group comes to the rear, so this is the bolt carrier group forward, the bolt carrier group comes to the rear, it pushes the lever down, which causes a little fin that's connected to the trigger to be cammed down by the cam, much like the Super Safety, and that causes the trigger to reset. And then when the bolt carrier moves back forward again, it hits that lever, rotating it forward, unlocking the trigger, much like the Super Safety. So this is kind of our prior art that covers the Super Safety's basic operating mode. This is important because it gives context to the patent of contention, which is the 247 patent. And I'm going to grab that one now. I'll grab the cease and desist. So all of these problems started when the holders of the 247 patent had their law firm send a cease and desist letter to one of the companies manufacturing the Super Safety. And in this patent, they alleged that the 247 patent covered the Super Safety and that it infringed upon it. And they specifically referenced claims 15 and claims 20. So we now need to go over the patent in detail. And that's this guy right here. This is United States Patent 12.038.247. And this is the patent which allegedly the Super Safety infringes on. The Super Safety was publicly released in July of 2023. This patent was filed the end of May 2023, and there's also a provisional going back to September. So this patent predates the public release of the Super Safety, though we do have some disclosure before that. I don't feel it's really relevant because this patent doesn't apply, as I will show you. As filed, this patent had 14 claims. 8 new claims were added in an amendment later, and we'll cover those when we get to them. For the time being, I want to go over the patent and show you what this patent is covering. It is basically taking the original Blakely patent, and it's adding a select fire mechanism to it, much like an M16. And if I move to, here is a nice illustration. So right here, this is a cutaway view showing something that's very similar to the Blakely patent. We have the trigger. If you can see back in here, there's that little fin on the trigger. Here is that block which has the cam on it, and it's all one piece. This is all from the Blakely patent. Not sure if that would actually work in real life, but that's what they're using. It's similar to the Super Safety. And then the thing they're adding, the new art, if you will, is this selector switch right here. It's a 3-position selector switch. 114 is a lobe on that selector switch, and then that lobe pushes down on a little extension on the disconnector. So for those of you who are familiar with how an M16 works, this is basically an M16 disconnector, and then this selector switch is similar to an M16 selector switch. So when it's rotated to the 3rd position, There it is on fire. On fire, it's just like a normal selector switch. When it's rotated to the third position right here, that lobe pushes down in the back of the disconnector, basically rotating the disconnector to the rear, remove it from the equation. So when this gun is put in the third position, the disconnector is made as if it wasn't ever there. You could take the disconnector out and get the same effect. So how does that make this thing select fire? Well, I'll show you. It uses what I call a half-sear engagement of the disconnector. So when this selector switch is in the fire position, where it's not displacing the disconnector, the weapon is fired by the user, the hammer falls, the hammer is then pushed back by the bolt carrier, it catches on the disconnector, the bolt carrier continues to the rear, it rotates the cam, forcing the trigger about 3/4 of the way into the reset position, but not 100%. What that does is it allows the sear up here to catch the hammer, but it's not enough to release the disconnector. So your finger moves forward part of the way, but the trigger never fully resets. It almost resets, but not quite. Super finicky way of doing it, and I think it's a bad way, but it is what it is. When you rotate to the third position, it displaces the disconnector, allowing the basically allowing the trigger to be reset, and that 90% reset with the disconnector removed is basically a full reset, because when the bolt carrier moves back forward again, it allows the hammer to stand up because there is no disconnector to catch it because it's been removed from the equation, which allows the hammer to catch on the trigger, and when the bolt carrier moves far enough forward, it rotates the cam, unlocking the trigger, allowing you to pull it again. That is how it works. That is what they're patenting here. And I'm going to show you a claim real quick just to explain that and how that works. Claim 1, and this was in the original patent as filed, is right here. And it's basically claiming a hammer, a trigger, as all the prior art, a trigger, a sears, a disconnector, a cam, having a cam lobe. This is the same as the Blakely patent. It just described having a cam lobe adapted to be mounted in a fire control mechanism pocket to pivot on a transverse cam pivot axis. Said cam being pivotable between a first position at which said cam does not force said trigger member towards said set position, and a second position at which said cam lobe does force trigger member towards set position. Once again, this is the same as the Blakely patent, same as the super safety. It's prior art. And then it mentions having a safety selector with 3 positions. That's pretty much like any selectable trigger works. And then we get into the actual meat and potatoes of it. And I will skip to the second meat and potatoes clause, the second paragraph, this one right here, because this one is the actual active reset mode, which is a little more relevant. But it says, in forced reset semi-automatic position, rearward, which is the position of their selector, rearward movement of the bolt carrier causes rearward pivoting of said hammer and pivoting of said cam from said first position to said second position, such that said cam lobe forces said trigger member to said second position. And then this is the important part, said safety selector preventing said disconnector hook from catching said hammer hook. And then it just finishes up by describing how any AR-15 would work. What they're claiming here is that they have a cam that's resetting the trigger, like the original Blakely patent, and then they're adding this mechanism which disables the disconnector to make it select fire. That's what this patent covers, and that's what they're claiming here. Now, many months, almost a year after the super safety was released, 8 new claims were added via an amendment to this patent. Now, you can do this because you can add new claims later to a patent with the intent of narrowing the scope of the patent. If your claims weren't specific enough, you can make them more specific later. One thing you can't do is you cannot add claim language later that expands the scope of the patent. Those claims must be supported by the original patent. Reading this patent and looking through their claim language, it in no way applies to the super safety. Hence, right away, we can see that there's no way you can add new claims that apply to the super safety, because if the original patent doesn't cover the super safety, which it doesn't mention anything super safety related as far as the new art, then the new claims can. And I'm going to go ahead and show you guys how these new claims have a number of issues. A lawsuit was filed back in June against a number of companies by the patent holders of the 247 patent. And this lawsuit basically lays out what they think is infringing. And what they think is infringing is not the rotation, because that's all prior art. What they're claiming is infringing is the super safety's method of selection. That is, the way I have 3 cams stacked up here and I'm selecting them by clicking right and left by the user. The user clicks between safe, active reset, and passive reset. I'm literally lining up different cams with the trigger. It's super simple. It was actually my dad's idea, and it works really, really good. So that is how the super safety works, and they're claiming that's the infringement. Let's try to show you guys how they're claiming that. And to do that, we're going to dig into their little claim chart in the complaint from the lawsuit. And it just, this is bolt carrier. This is all the generic claims that are just talking about prior art. And then we get, here we go. This is the first definition. And in their claims, they're defining having a cam with a cam lobe movable between 2 positions. And this is, from the Blakely patent, but it's in there, and it's important because it's referenced later. And reading the patent, it's obvious that the first and second position has to do with the rotation of the cam or the movement of the cam via the action of the bolt carrier in order to reset the trigger and not reset the trigger. So it goes forward, then unlocks it. This is what the first, so that's the second position, that's the first position. And right here in their own complaint, it shows that cam lobe in first position, it shows the super safety being forward, and then cam lobe in second position shows the super safety rearward, resetting the the trigger into its reset position, even though it doesn't show that because it's crappy CAD, but that's what they're trying to show here. So there's your first position, there's your second position. Clearly it has to do with the cam rotating via the bolt carrier group. Those are the first two positions. Now, what they're alleging is they're alleging that the first and second position has to do with the user moving the cam side to side. They're claiming that when the force reset semi-automatic position, the cam is moved laterally to a second position. So that's what they're alleging. Right away, there's a bunch of issues with this, which we're going to break down. And I'm going to get the actual claim. Claim 20 has a bunch of prior art, talks about a disconnector. It mentions having a cam right here. It mentions having the cam with the two different positions. This is where it defines those positions. One of them causes it to reset, one of them doesn't. There's only one way to do that, and that's via motion of the bolt carrier group. So that's their own definition right there. And then we got safety selector. And then right here, we have the important part, which is these two clauses right here. And this is what they're trying to use against the super safety. So I'm going to read you one of these clauses, and then we'll get into problems. So it says, in said standard semi-automatic position, that's the position of the selector, said cam is in said first position, which means the cam is forward. Rearward movement of the bolt carrier causes rearward pivoting of said hammer such that said disconnector hook catches said hammer hook. Thereafter, the bolt carrier moves forward into battery, at which time the user must manually release the trigger member to free said hammer from said disconnector to permit said hammer and trigger member to pivot to said set position so the user can pull said trigger member to fire the firearm. So what they did there is they literally just said that they just described how an AR-15 works in semi-automatic mode. It's just a verbatim description of how an AR-15 fire control group works. The only thing they added was said cam is in said first position. They added that. Okay, so the cam is in said first position. It means the cam is swung forward when it starts. So the cam is forward like that. Forward like that. It hasn't been pushed to the rear yet. That's fine, right? Let's move on to the next one. In said force reset position, in the said force reset semi-automatic position, said cam is in said second position. Rearward movement of the bolt carrier causes rearward pivoting of said hammer such that said disconnector hook is prevented from catching said hammer hook. Thereafter, the bolt carrier moves forward into battery, at which time the user can pull said trigger member to fire the firearm. This is where all the problems are. First of all, it describes nothing related to the super safety. It makes no reference to moving a cam side to side. It doesn't mention the user moving anything. It literally says cam is in said second position. So the second position is when the super safety is pushed to the rear like that. At that point, the only way the cam can be in the second position is when the bolt carrier group is to the rear. So here, they're describing, and I'll even show you a picture from this to make it more clear. It really doesn't make any sense. It's completely nonsensical. And there's a reason for it we'll get into. Right here, this is the cam in the second position. The only way to get this second position is to have a bolt carrier, this guy right here, up here, that's already moved to the rear, pushing that cam back. That is the only way to get that position. So what they're saying is their bolt carrier group is already moved to the rear, and then rearward movement of the bolt carrier causes rearward pivoting of said hammer. So they're saying the bolt carrier is already to the rear, and then the bolt carrier moves to the rear. That's non-functional. That doesn't work. So mechanically, they're describing an impossible action here. That's the first problem. So this claim is completely invalid because it's non-functional. A claim has to be functional underneath the specification. You have to be able to point to the specification and say somewhere that this is how it works. Like this moves here, this moves there. They're saying that this is here, and then this goes here. They're saying basically something does the same thing twice without ever going back. That doesn't work. So that's the first problem with this. It's just simply non-functional. The second problem is that it is trying to take language that means one thing and use it in a different way. And this is my favorite problem with it. They're trying to say that the cam isn't, so this is non-functional, right? But why would someone write something non-functional? That's what you're asking. I asked myself the same question. It took me a while to figure it out, and I finally did. And it's really displayed well over here in the complaint. In the complaint, it says and this is just from the patent. It says, in standard semi-automatic mode, said cam is in said first position. And then we come over here to how they think that applies to the super safety. They say, in standard semi-automatic mode, the cam is moved laterally to a first position. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to say that the first and second position has to do with the cam moving laterally by the user. Clearly, the first and second position, as shown in their own complaint, has to do with the cam being rotated via the bolt carrier group or moved in some way via the bolt carrier group. It has nothing to do with the user selecting cam mode. So the fun part here is that they say, right here in the complaint, it says said cam is in said first position. And then over here, it says the said cam is moved to a first position. It's not the same position, not the same said position, just a position. So they're trying to take a specific movement and apply it to an unrelated movement. That's what they're trying to do here. That's my interpretation of it. So that's why this is so funky. They were trying to take the previous valid language from the patent and twist it to cover the super safety. Because they're trying to use previous language, they've opened up a huge hole here in the patent. And it says, in said force reset semi-automatic position, said cam in said second position, rearward movement of the bolt carrier causes rearward pivoting of said hammer, such that said disconnector hook is prevented from catching said hammer hook. Well, that's not how the super safety works. The super safety, when you fire the weapon in super safe mode, the hammer falls, firing the weapon. The hammer then is pushed rearward by the bolt carrier. It catches on the disconnector. The disconnector always functions. In the super safety, no matter what mode you place it in, the disconnector is always active and it always catches the hammer. The bolt carrier group then continues to move to the rear. At some later time, the bolt carrier group hits the lever, rotates the lever to the rear, resetting the trigger. At that time, the disconnector releases the hammer and the trigger catches the hammer. That's how the super safety works. The disconnector is not prevented from catching it. So right away, the description is not even describing the super safety. So those are a couple issues with it here. Because of that, it's pretty obvious that this patent doesn't cover the super safety in any way, and that this is simply a gross attempt at expanding a patent scope after it was filed to cover existing technology. Okay, so all that gobbledygook we just went over the last 20 minutes probably has you guys pretty confused. It's a bit of a mess. So let's quickly summarize it. First of all, the original FR15 patent has nothing to do with the super safety. It doesn't apply. No one's saying it applies. It's completely irrelevant. The super safety is covered underneath the now expired patent, the original Blakely patent, which describes how the rotation functions and then the cam part functions. Basically, the heart of the super safety is prior art. No one's alleging that that's being infringed or that's infringing any patents. It's clearly prior art. What's being alleged is that the super safety's selection mechanism, clicking from the left to the right side by the user, is infringing on the 247 patent. The 247 patent very clearly described a system of disabling the disconnector to select between different modes. The super safety never interacts with the disconnector, period. It does not in any way infringe the 247 patent. New claims were added after I publicly released the super safety in an attempt to capture the super safety. Those new claims are trying to use wording from earlier in the patent so that they look valid to then apply to the super safety. They're doing this using a functional description of a generic force reset trigger, sort of. There are two reasons that these claims are not a problem. The super safety does not infringe them. The first reason is that the claims are nonsensical. They describe a mechanical action that is impossible because they refer to something being all the way in the second position, which means the bolt carrier group is all the way to the rear, and then they say the bolt carrier group moves all the way to the rear. So first, right off the bat, they're describing an impossible configuration. So they're invalid for that reason in and of themselves. Secondly, they describe a force reset trigger in the context of the claims. They are describing a trigger which prevents the disconnector from functioning. And they use that language because that's how their patent works in the 247 patent. The super safety does not prevent the disconnector from functioning. It does not interact with the disconnector in any way. The disconnector continues to function as it normally does. So they're not even describing the super safety. Now, you might ask then, how is there possibly a lawsuit? Well, that's because in the lawsuit, they are attempting to grossly change the language or redefine terms. And in fact, as we've gone over, the lawsuit, the complaint itself shows the first and second position being the rotation of the super safety, and then it tries to use the first and second position to describe the super safety clicking to the right and to the left. And that's clearly not the case. It's a very clearly defined term, the first and second positions, and it has nothing to do with the user moving a safety from the left side to the right side. So it's simply a twisting of terms. It does not apply to super safety in any way. And I hope you guys found this video informational, clearing up a lot of the congestion surrounding this patent disaster. And yeah, hope you guys found it interesting. Catch you again next time. Thanks for watching.